A 7-year-old and a 4-year-old find themselves in their bedroom, engaged in a curious conversation. The 7-year-old suggests, "You know what? I think it's time we started using bad words." The 4-year-old, intrigued, responds, "Okay, sounds interesting. What's the plan?" The two youngsters decide to implement their new plan when they go downstairs for breakfast. The 7-year-old agrees to be the first to use a bad word, followed by the 4-year-old. So they descend the stairs, and when they reach the kitchen, their mom asks the 7-year-old what he'd like for breakfast. With newfound audacity, the 7-year-old boldly declares, "I'll have Frosties," the B word. In a swift response, their mom delivers a firm whack, causing the 7-year-old to tumble out of his chair, tears welling up in his eyes. Seeing this, the mom shifts her stern gaze to the 4-year-old and asks, "And what would you like for breakfast?" Unfazed by the dramatic turn of events, the 4-year-old calmly responds, "I'm not quite sure, but I definitely don't want those F Frosties." Once, there was a taxi driver by the name of Sky, who was a regular presence at the taxi stands near the port. One day, a Russian sea captain hailed his cab. The captain was eager for a memorable time in New York City, and Sky was more than happy to oblige. He took the captain to an early Broadway show, guided him to some outstanding bars, and even introduced him to the lively scene of a back-alley gambling establishment. Around 2 a.m., Sky dropped the captain off at his hotel. In appreciation for the fantastic night, the captain handed Sky a generous tip. He also provided specific instructions for an early morning pickup at 7 a.m. to return to his ship. However, as morning broke, the Russian sea captain's disposition had taken a sharp turn for the worse. His head throbbed, his heart ached, and he had discovered that he was now several $1,000s lighter. Understandably, he was in an exceedingly foul mood when Sky arrived to collect him. The captain wore an expression of anger and despair, making Sky decide to maintain a tactful silence as he drove them to the pier, where he eventually mentioned the fare for the ride. In response, the captain erupted in a torrent of curses directed at Sky, his ancestry, the entire city, and then flung some bills onto the taxi's floor before storming out and slamming the door. This incident underscores the truth of an age-old saying, "A red-sailed sailor at night, sky's delight. A red-sailed sailor in the morning sky, take warning." One day, a police officer patrolling a park spotted a young boy near the playground. To his astonishment, the boy was using a rather unconventional material for his play, a combination of sand and, well, you guessed it, poop. Perplexed, the cop approached the child and asked, "What on earth are you doing, kid?" Without a hint of hesitation, the boy cheerfully replied, "I'm making a policeman." The cop was utterly taken aback, unable to comprehend the strange combination of materials and the child's intentions. Frustration got the best of him, and he gave the kid a stern reprimand, along with a punishment, before sending him home. The very next day, the police officer couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the same boy, back at the same spot, engaging in the same unusual activity with poop and sand. A mixture of amusement and curiosity prompted the cop to approach the boy again and inquire, "What are you doing this time?" With a grin, the boy responded, "I'm making a priest." The officer, still amused by the boy's peculiar choice of materials for his play, couldn't help but ask, "Why aren't you making a policeman like yesterday?" The boy shrugged and replied, "I did try, but there just wasn't enough poop." In Hong Kong, there once resided a wealthy and esteemed elderly gentleman known as Grandpa Lee. Grandpa Lee shared his grand mansion with Grandma Lee and their 3 daughters, each of whom was called Miss Lee. The eldest Miss Lee eventually got married. Considering her prestigious family background, she opted to retain her last name, becoming Madam Lee. Madam Lee and her husband had a son and a daughter who were known for their kindness and generosity toward the neighborhood kids. They treated others as if they were their own siblings, earning them the titles of Brother Lee and Sister Lee. Consequently, Madam Lee came to be known as Mother Lee, and her husband was referred to as Father Lee. The second Miss Lee also tied the knot and had 2 daughters. These daughters and Brother Lee and Sister Lee mutually addressed each other as Cousin Lee. However, the youngest daughter remained single, having experienced limited luck in the realm of romance. As the youngest of the Lee family, she expressed a preference for men from the Western world. One fateful day, Johnny from the United States embarked on a vacation to Hong Kong. Rumors had reached him about the youngest Lee daughter seeking a Western husband. When Johnny and Miss Lee met, sparks flew, and their connection was instantaneous. They enjoyed dates and decided to be in a committed relationship. While Johnny had to return home following his vacation, Miss Lee decided to travel to the United States for a vacation of her own. They continued their long-distance relationship, traveling back and forth between Hong Kong and the United States. However, they hadn't yet tied the knot, as they were still deliberating whether to establish their home in Hong Kong or the United States. One day, while they were in Hong Kong, Johnny received news of a lockdown in the United States due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Initially assuming it would be a short-term situation, Johnny returned home to care for his elderly mother, while Miss Lee stayed in Hong Kong in case a similar situation unfolded there. The lockdown persisted for an entire year. Throughout that time, Johnny and Miss Lee maintained their love through messages and calls. After the lockdown ended, Johnny decided to visit Hong Kong one last time. He planned to work on acquiring citizenship, purchasing property, and seeking employment in his field. Johnny's skills quickly secured him a high-paying job close to his newly acquired property, where he intended to live with his mother. Upon arriving in Hong Kong, Miss Lee welcomed him while holding a child in her arms. Johnny was taken aback by the surprise. Unbeknownst to him, Miss Lee had been pregnant when he last visited Hong Kong before the lockdown. Given Miss Lee's wealth, her family had comfortably managed the pregnancy. They decided to astonish Johnny with the news of his son when he returned to Hong Kong. Excited yet shocked, they checked into a nearby hotel. The three of them were now united: Johnny, Miss Lee, and their affectionately called Baby Lee. Johnny decided to break the news to his mother, believing she would be thrilled about moving to Hong Kong. Johnny called his mother, and after 3 rings, she answered, saying, "Hello?" Johnny cautiously began, "Mom, I have some wonderful news, but please don't be alarmed. My girlfriend was actually pregnant when I left last year. I am now a father, apparently." The other night, I had been invited for a rare night out with the guys, and I promised my wife that I would be back home by the stroke of midnight. We all know how these things go, though. Time flies when you're having fun, and the Jameson shots went down a little too smoothly. Before I knew it, it was 3:45 a.m., and I was not just a bit tipsy, I was downright plastered. Panic set in as I realized I had broken my promise, and I knew I had to get home ASAP to avoid any marital discord. So, in my inebriated state, I fumbled for my phone and called a cab. As I stumbled into the back seat, I instructed the driver to get me home as quickly as possible. The clock was ticking, and so was my unease. As the cab sped toward home, I couldn't help but worry about what would happen when I walked in the door. My thoughts raced. My wife was a stickler for punctuality, and I had broken my word. Just as I arrived at our doorstep, I heard the cuckoo clock in the hallway strike 4 times to signal that it was 4 a.m. My heart sank. I needed to think fast to avoid the impending conflict. In my somewhat inebriated brilliance, I concocted a plan. I decided to cuckoo the clock myself to make it seem like it was still midnight. In my foggy state, I cuckooed an additional 8 times, thinking it was a stroke of genius. With my mission accomplished, I tiptoed into the bedroom, trying my best to act sober. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a sense of accomplishment. I was sure I had pulled off a brilliant ruse to save face with my wife. When she asked me what time I had finally made it home, I confidently replied, "Midnight, just as I promised." She looked at me, her suspicions seemingly dispelled, but just as I began to breathe a sigh of relief, she dropped the bombshell. By the way, she said, we need to replace that old cuckoo clock. I was caught off guard. Why on earth do we need a new cuckoo clock? I asked, feigning ignorance. With a playful grin, she explained, well, last night I was awakened by the cuckoo clock in the hallway. It cuckooed 4 times, then it said, oh shit. It went on to cuckoo 3 more times, cleared its throat, cuckooed another 3 times, giggled, cuckooed twice more, and then it tripped over the cat and farted.